Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is In Case You Missed It from Kates-Boylston for the week ending Friday, July 25th, 2025. Before we get into everything, I want to remind you to swing by events.katesboylston.com. There's a link in the show notes. We have a bunch of stuff coming up in the fall, including a one-day event in person in Detroit, which should be a blast. So check out the link in the show notes for details, and we're going to get to the news right after this message from our friends and sponsors at Homesteaders Life.
In a business built on trust, consistent financial strength speaks volumes. That's why I'm proud to share that AM Best has once again affirmed Homesteaders' financial strength with an A- excellent rating. Last year was a transformative one for our company, and AM Best affirmation tells us we're on the right track. As a mutual company owned by our policy owners, we remain laser focused on delivering dependable value, industry-leading support, and future-ready solutions to funeral professionals nationwide. Homesteaders is stronger than ever by every measure. Our partners rely on us for the long term, and it is critical that we execute at a high level today while aggressively planning for the future. Reach out to your Homesteaders account executive to hear more about how we are leading the profession in investing in tools and services that benefit funeral providers.
First up, we have an interesting, odd story out of Montclair, New Jersey, where the town was planning to set aside a section to plan to make it into affordable housing someday in the future. And the person who owned the funeral home that was in the block of houses they had designated said, "Hey, wait a minute. I have a business here. It's not affordable housing fodder. It is my business and my livelihood." And the town made all the necessary apologies, and they took it off the list. But it's really, it's unfortunate. Montclair, if you're not familiar, Montclair is a pretty Tony city town in New Jersey. It's not far from New York, and there's a lot of wealth in Montclair, which means that they don't have a lot of places for the people who do the jobs in Montclair to live, and this is why it's an issue. One of the people who does the jobs is the funeral director. Rochelle Williams is her name, and she's the manager and funeral director for Martin's Home for Service, which has served the Montclair community for 75 years. And what is the reason I think that it connects with us and with a lot of the stories that we tell is we often talk about funeral homes that are too expensive, to ever be bought and turned into funeral homes. And here's one where the town is actually looking at it and saying, we'd be better off having affordable housing than having a funeral home there. So, fortunately for Ms. Williams and for the families there, because that was the other thing, when the families saw in the paper that the funeral home was being turned into affordable housing, they're like, well, we have pre-need contracts there. We already paid for our funeral there. What are we going to do when the town turns it into affordable housing? So, it was, disaster averted, but just these stories, and there are a couple NIMBY stories this week that I'm not even going to bother sharing because I'm tired of hearing myself talk about it. But it's just always so disappointing to see how little communities think of their funeral home when they're not going to a funeral home, when they're not going to a funeral in it. So, and I don't think that it's lack of outreach or education, certainly on the part of Martin's Home for Service, because that was the community, the local, very local community rose up and they're like, no, you can't take our funeral home away for affordable housing. So, at least the neighbors were paying close enough attention, and the people who were already committed to this funeral home were paying attention. Anyway, there is a link to the story at the show notes. I've included the link to this interview in the show notes, but there's no written aspect of it anywhere. So you'll have to listen And I invite you to listen to this commentary on the Texas Funeral Service Commission from Houston Public Radio. It's at about 38 minutes, and I'll put the note again in the show notes if you want to listen to it. But they interviewed Cody Lopaski, who is the president and school director of the Commonwealth Institute of Funeral Service there in the Houston area. And now I haven't done any stories, although I shared a couple about the all the shenanigans going on at the Texas Funeral Service Commission lately, including the firing, dismissal of the executive director, and some of the weird accusations that they were making. And there's links to all that and the reporting that goes around it in the show notes. I haven't been able to dig into it myself, so I want to kind of lay off of any specific commenting until I get a better handle on it. But what was interesting about this is when there is, and there have been some body mishandling incidents in Texas that have gotten a lot of play, and that plus all the infighting in the Texas Funeral Service Commission makes the public nervous, and no one wants the public to be nervous. So that's why they did this story, and they spoke with Mr. Lopaski and asked him, what's the deal? Is this just a few bad actors? Why is everything seem to be crumbling around us? And he did a very good job, I think, defending and explaining the process. And, it's one of these things, and, I hate to pick on Texas, but, they have this kind of independent name. And I've mentioned before, nobody wants any rules until somebody breaks them. Then they want rules. So what he sees as the problem in Texas is that they want someone to enforce the regulations, but they don't want to have a staff to go out and enforce the regulations. And being understaffed and not choosing to pay people to do the job means that the job doesn't get done. And so there have been serious lapses in Texas over the the annual inspection process. And that is one of the things that kind of was revealed with their particular recent body handling problem in Richmond. There are 13 bodies and 89 cremated remains neglected, and the police discovered it when they were responding to a different crime altogether. And it's just been a lot of egg on the face of the Texas Funeral Service Commission. And now they've done away with their executive director, and a politically connected person has kind of stepped up into that role. And we'll see how that goes. We'll see if they get enough money to have enough inspectors, or if this continues to go on. And like I said, I'd like to do some actual reporting on it myself. We'll see how much I can get done in the next couple weeks. But until then, there's a link to all of these stories in the show notes. And speaking of unclaimed remains, there's a story in Pennsylvania that I've linked to where this kind of man about town had his funeral, and the family has not come forward to pay for the funeral, and they also have not come forward to collect the cremated remains. And I know that those are two separate things, but they're not really designated that way in this story. And I would love to hear from any of the listeners who run funeral homes whether this kind of thing is effective or not. But the story is mostly about how this guy's family won't pay the bill and all of their collection efforts. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I would do if someone owed me $3,200. But the newspaper, it's headlined like it's about uncollected remains, but then it's really about uncollected money. And I don't know how the funeral home comes off in it, and I invite you to take a look and to decide if this is something that you would do or wouldn't do to get your hands on a payment. And because there are a lot of details that they're like, we called the brother, and they give the brother's name, and we called the man's place of business because he was popular at a bar, and they were trying to get the bar to pay. And then they tried starting a kind of a GoFundMe to kind of clear the bill, which didn't have any takers. And so it's interesting to see this an insight into at least one funeral home's kind of collection methods and interest, and we'll see if they're lucky and they reach the brother who has disappeared, or they're able to get some money out of the GoFundMe to clear the bill, and they report on it in the news. I'll tell you about it here. But I would really like to have a conversation if anyone is willing to shoot me an email. Again, I can keep them confidential. I always do when I'm asked, to tell me if this is a kind of story that is common. But I don't see it very often. I've seen a couple where they're like, this guy doesn't pay, but I mean, maybe twice in the last 3 years, or 3 times. It's rare to see a story that mostly focuses on how someone didn't pay for their brother's funeral or uncle's funeral or someone like that. Anyway, link in the show notes. And I wanted to tell you about this news about expanded benefits, temporarily expanded burial benefits from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs between July 1st and October 1st, 2026. Veterans who are discharged from a VA-approved medical or nursing care can receive VA-provided hospice care at their home, and if they pass away before October 1st, 2026, they will receive their full benefits. Secretary Doug Collins said that this expanded benefit aims to better support veterans who choose to spend their final days at home, surrounded by loved ones. Families and caregivers of eligible veterans are encouraged to contact their local VA, and I guess funeral directors are as well, to make sure that they're getting all of the information right. That number is 800-827-1000 for more information, and there is a link in the show notes. And that will do me for this week. In case you missed it, From Kates-Boylston is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. And if you would like to get in contact with me, you can send me an email by clicking on the show notes and then clicking on the email link, or you can call and leave a message at 732-746-0233, extension 709. That is 732-746-0233, extension 709. I would love to hear, if nothing else, about some of your experiences with collections and whether you've ever resorted to or needed to resort to, a newspaper article saying, hey, this guy hasn't had his remains claimed or his bill paid. Because I want to know if that's a normal thing to do, and I want to know if there's a good way to do it versus a bad way to do it in your experience. So please reach out to me if you have a chance. And that is all on this week for In Case You Missed It. I will check in with you next time.